Is it a circle now, or... And of course there is nothing wrong with you. I don't believe in a writer binary. Labels like plotting and pantsing are very, very common in the writing community. You have probably been asked at one point or another if you are a plotter or a pantser. Personally, I identify as a plotter, but in this discussion video I am going to be talking about those terms and why I feel like maybe we're putting too much stock on them in our community. Let's begin with a super short run-through of the basics. What is plotting and pantsing? Basically what they are is two different approaches to writing a book. A plotter, broadly speaking, makes an outline before they start writing the book. Before they start writing, they know the world, they know the characters, they know the beginning, middle, end, and they have done all of that work before they start writing the first draft. So a pure plotter has no surprises during the drafting process. Whereas a pantser, on the other hand, again, broadly speaking, has nothing but surprises. They don't have anything at all when they start writing. They have a blank sheet of paper, and then they just start writing away, typing away. However it is, they get the words on the page. I mean, I don't know if a pure pantser has absolutely nothing. Since I'm a plotter, I don't really know. Maybe you have some vague concept or a character or an event that you start from, but basically, nothing from my point of view as a plotter. And there are other terms for these things. There are terms like architect or gardener or planner and discovery writer and things like that. But essentially, it's all the same thing. It's all these two things. So that was a super short run through. Let me know if you think that my definition is wrong or insufficient or something. Personally, I think that these definitions or these terms are insufficient, but I'm gonna get into that right now, actually. The problem is that writing is way more complicated than this. It's way more complicated than just saying that I plan everything in advance or I plan nothing in advance. There are a lot of things in between there, which is where terms like plantser or plotter, as Michelle Schusterman called it in the video that inspired me to make this video. The link is down in the description. You should check that out. But the idea there is that there is a spectrum where there is pantser on one end and plotter on the other, and you put yourself somewhere in between. At least most people put themselves, in between and not at the extremes, although some people put themselves much closer to the extremes than others. And this is fine, this is good, you found a way to not be at the extremes. My problem is that writing is actually even more complicated than that, and a spectrum doesn't really do it. First of all, there's a very blurry line between what makes a plotter or a pantser or a plantser or whatever you call yourself. For example, if you're a person who start out with a very vague idea and then you write a bit, and then at a certain point you sit down and instead you plot the next bit, and then you write that, and then you plot the next bit and write that, and so on and so forth. Is that a plotter or is it a pantser? Probably it's some sort of plantser or plotter or whatever it is, but that is just one way of being in the middle, and where would you put yourself? And there is an even more interesting example, and this is an actual established author. I think it might be Dan Wells. I'm not entirely certain, but I think I heard it on Writing Excuses. Could be him, I don't know, don't quote me on that. Either way, this established author, what they do, they call themselves a pantser, a hardcore pantser. But the first draft that they write is not what maybe most people would call a first draft. It is actually more of a really, really detailed outline. So this author has gone so far into being a pantser that they've sort of ended up being a plotter after all. So is it a circle now, or I don't know. The fact of the matter is that everyone has to pants. There is no way of writing a book without pantsing. If nothing else, you pants your outline. You always start from nothing or start from something very small and then build that up. And if you build that up as an outline or as a first draft, in a way, does it really matter? I don't know. And conversely, I think that arguably everyone also has to plot. Even if you plot after you've written your first draft, you've written the entire first draft, you've pantsed the entire first draft, eventually you're going to have to plot, otherwise you're not going to get a cohesive story. So my bold claim is that plotter and pantser, plotting and pantsing, do not describe two vastly different things. Instead, they are describing the same thing, you just do them at different stages of the process. And maybe that isn't such a bold claim, really, when I hear it out loud. Maybe that is, in fact, the very definition of them, but I still think that this is worth saying, because I just want to make clear that being a plotter or a pantser, the distinction between them are kind of useless. Let me put it this way. Labels are comforting, in a way. They're very comforting to be able to say that I am a plotter and feel a sort of camaraderie with other plotters, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem arrives if and when you start changing your behavior so that you will fit into one of these labels. Especially since there is no clear, universally agreed upon definition of either label. So the good news is that you can fit into whatever label you want. The bad news, especially for new writers, is that you might feel like there is something wrong with you because you don't fit into either one of these boxes. And of course there is nothing wrong with you. Of course there is nothing wrong with not fitting neatly into a specific box. Most people do not fit neatly into any specific box. But I know that a lot of new writers, when they hear plotter or pantser, they have to put themselves into one of those boxes, and then they realize that, no, but I don't do it exactly this way. And the problem, like I said, again, is when you start changing your behavior because you want to fit into one box, and you think that, well, I'm doing it wrong. I am not making the entire outline first. I have a lot of holes. I need to fill in these holes before I can start writing. That's a trap that I fell into as a new writer when I started hearing about plotting or pantsing. I don't think those were the terms I heard of, but either way, these two extremes, these two labels that you have to put yourself in. And I was like, well, I am mostly a plotter, but also I don't actually have absolutely everything. There are things that I don't think of before I start writing a book. But in order to be a plotter, I have to think about these things, and that made my writing process weird and wrong, and it didn't work. And that's sort of, in a nutshell, the reason why I don't really like those labels. So the question is, am I just critiquing this, or do I actually have a solution to this problem that I have created? The answer is yes. I have actually come up with a different way of defining my process that I think is much better. It's also much more complicated because writing is complicated, but I like it and I want to share it. And if no one else likes it, that's fine, because I have had fun. So what I came up with when I wanted a new way of defining my process was this. This is a radar chart, or a WEBBLOB as we like to call it. The parameters that you see around the edge here is world building, themes, characters, beginning, middle, end, and so on. These are some, but far from all, obviously, aspects of a story. The chart itself shows how much of each aspect I figure out before I start drafting, while I'm writing the first draft, and after I've finished the first draft. And this is not exact, it's just some numbers that I put in that made sense to me so that I could illustrate the idea. So the blue you see here is what I do before starting the first draft. So it's a lot of world building, I figure out the beginning of the story, some of the middle, but not a whole lot of the end. The purple is what I focus on, or what I do while I'm writing the first draft, and what I do there is that I come up with more subplots, for example, and I also get a much firmer grasp of the end. And then the green is what changes from the first draft to upcoming ones. And it's not much, as you can see. It's mostly a little bit in theme, although honestly I don't think all that much about theme at any point of writing the story. But it's also the end, it's a bit in the middle, and in the subplots. It is very little of, for example, the premise, world building, or motivations of the characters. Those are things that I generally have either before starting the first draft, or that I get a firm grasp of while writing. So the large amount of blue here supports the hypothesis that I am indeed a plotter, because I do so much before I start writing. If I had more purple, that would be leaning more towards plotzer, and if I had a lot more purple, then that's a pantser. I think pantser would be mostly purple and not, more green than purple, because actually I have no idea. I shouldn't speak for the pantsers in the world. You guys get to speak for yourself. What do you think? Would that be more green, more purple? I don't know. Again, I think that this is a pretty good way of describing my process, at least. It might be a good way of describing other people's processes as well. Above all, I just want to point out that plotter and pantser, while fine, they're good labels if you feel like you fit into one of them, and if you don't, it's fine to just call yourself a plotzer. But the point I want to make is that it's okay if you don't fit into either end of the spectrum, and it is also okay to fit one place for one project and another place for another project. I know a lot of writers sort of find themselves in an existential crisis if they have been plotting all of their stories until now, and then all of a sudden they try pantsing a project and they find that they like it and it goes well, and all of a sudden, am I a plotter or am I a pantser? Do I have to pants all the projects from now on? This has happened to me, and while existential crisis is maybe a little bit dramatic and it's often said with humor, it can also be debilitating if you feel like now I have to do everything this way, because maybe it was just that project that worked well as a pantsing project. Now, I do want to say that there's nothing wrong with analyzing your style, and in fact, I would encourage you to analyze how you write, because it's good to know how you work. But the plotter-pantser scale, I think, is too rigid, and I don't believe in binaries. I don't believe in a writer binary. You can exist between these labels, or you can exist outside of those labels. You don't have to be one or the other. And I think my WEBBLOB is pretty good. Again, you can change the parameters depending on what aspects you focus on in a story, like I said before. And you can have fewer parameters than I did, or you can have more. I could have had more. I could have put in dialogue, for example, which would have been mostly purple. And I could have put in descriptions, which would have been almost all green. And you can also add or subtract from the charts, or the colors. Instead of doing what I did with before, during, or after drafting, you could add more and have first draft, second draft, third draft, and so on. You can do whatever you want. Again, this is a discussion video, which may have gotten very rambly. I don't know. I feel like it's a bit rambly, but that's fine. The point is, I would love to hear what you think of this in the comments below. Do you think that plotter, pantser, that scale, or whatever you're calling it, is perfectly fine and I am just needlessly complicating things? That's entirely possible. Maybe I am. I do that sometimes. Or maybe you have your own idea of how to categorize your writing style, or everyone's writing style. Also, if you do the WEBBLOB, let me know what that looks like. And really, whatever comes to mind, whatever you want to talk about regarding the writing process or anything else, let me know in the comments. I am looking forward to seeing you down there. Thank you for watching. Be safe. I will see you in the comments or in the next video.